Next up, I'm really thrilled to have Dan Olsen. He's a field biologist in North Gulf Oceanic Society, who's always a popular speaker here, and has just a really cool audio and pictures of killer whales. And his talk was titled "Mom Knows Best," appropriate the day after Mother's Day. Mom Knows Best: Culture Among Killer Whales. Welcome, Dan.
Well, hello, how's everyone doing? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Raise your hand if you've never seen a killer whale before. All right, just getting the finger on the pulse. Raise your hand if you had no idea there were 3 different types of killer whale here in the North Pacific. Good for admitting that. Now on the flip side, raise your hand if you know what is the main diet item of what we call an offshore killer whale. Shark, yes, excellent, well done. My name is Dan Olsen. I've been working with the North Gulf Oceanic Society since roughly 2004 in some capacity. I'm a field biologist, but I also work as a naturalist in Antarctica and the Arctic, and occasionally Alaska as well. I was a captain for tour boats down in Seward for a long time and did some kayaking. I live in Seward currently, and if you never get through the tunnel at all, Seward is right about here, if you want a map, and a couple 100 miles that way, 100 miles that way, not even 100 miles, 88 miles that way. I've been involved, North Gulf Oceanic Society is not a great name if you want anyone to remember who you are. And so I do highly recommend, if you want to find us, look for Whales Alaska, whalesalaska.org, whalesalaska@gmail, Instagram @whalesalaska. Whales Alaska is an easy way to find us. And if you've ever seen a family tree of a family of killer whales in Alaska, it's our nonprofit who works with them. Down in Washington State, you may have heard the southern residents that are having a hard time. And down there you have, I don't know how many it is right now, 75 individuals or so, and you have about 200 researchers. Up here we have about 3 or 4 researchers and about 1,000 animals. 2,000, 3,000 if you go out to the Aleutian Islands. So we have our work cut out for us. We do as much as we can on a very limited budget. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I got involved. One last time, raise your hand if you think culture only applies to humans. Good. You're training up well. The clicking is echolocation. The call belongs to only one family, the AJ pod, which are often seen at Kayak Island, Hinchinbrook Entrance, Montague Strait. Only the AJs make that call, and we know that from years of research. And they have a few different calls that they make. So these calls are learned from mother and grandmother and get passed down through generation. That's one of the ways in which we see culture exhibited amongst killer whales. Now raise your hand if you think I'm wrong for saying the word killer whales. Shouldn't it be orca? No, be brave. Go ahead. It's fine. Anybody? Yeah, all right. Right on. There's a lot of public sentiment about that. If I am a scientist, if I write a research paper, I am obliged to say killer whale because that is the common name in English for this species, like tufted puffin, horned puffin. Killer whale in English is the actual, mostly in the public, people like to use orca. They're not killers, but if you're a salmon, they're killers for sure. I'd like to introduce you to 18-9 Chiniga, and she's a mother, likely a grandmother, but this family tree is harder to piece together all of the offspring. This is how I got started. In 2004, I made a recording. I saw one lone animal splashing, and I wasn't involved in the nonprofit yet. I saw her breaching her tail and splashing in Thumb Cove out of Seward. I was running a tour boat. Sounds quite lonely. Like, guys. And this is a call that belongs only to the AT1 transients. I don't like the name transient. There's a group of animals that hunts mammals, and a very specific one that's genetically distinct from other killer whales who hunt mammals in this region. And I made a recording of these calls, and right about that moment, the research boat was coming around the Cape, and I said to Craig and Eva, would you like to hear this recording I made? And Eva's like, oh, that's the AT1, the Chugach transients trying to get in touch with the rest of its pod. And I was like, yeah, right, of course. I didn't know that you could know families by their calls at that time. And sure enough, when I departed, I ran into two more. 45 minutes later, they were all together. They did regroup. That's a call they use to regroup. We don't see grammar or vocabulary, but we do see regrouping calls or family names, basically. And in this case, this is the call that got me hooked, and it ended up sending me back to grad school. Got a master's at UA Fairbanks in fisheries biology. Here are 7 of there was originally 22 of them. A few years ago, there were 7. Now there's 6. AT3 has been missing for a couple years. So the very 2 top ones and the 4 lower right ones are still surviving out of 22 animals. And what happened? Well, they swam right through the oil. Exxon Valdez oil spill in 1989, and 9 individuals were lost within a year after the spill. And we continued to see a decline over the years. So we have 6 remaining out of 22, and they haven't had a calf since 1988, the year before the oil spill. They're not the only ones. The AB pod, which eat fish, not mammals, AB pod also swam through the oil spill and declined by about 25% as well. AB pod, differently, is recovering, but their growth rate is not as strong as the growth rate of other pods in the region. So they were affected as well, but the AT1s are certainly on their way to extinction. And I don't use that term lightly. You usually don't talk about extinction for family groups in science. We talk about it for population or species. But again, it's a genetically distinct family. And so it is a loss of genetic diversity when we lose this family. And as we lose them, we lose those calls. And we won't be hearing their calls as we go down the future. If you'd like a really good, excellent book by somebody who spent a lot of time in Prince William Sound, Eva Salidas, was around for the oil spill, watched her. She studied these Chugach transients, the AT1s. She studied them for her master's project, those calls that I played for you. She studied those calls, and we hear less and less of them. She wrote a beautiful book, Integrate Silence. And she was facing her own mortality, battling with cancer while she was watching the pod that she studied decline due to contaminants also. It's a very vulnerable and excellent book. Raise your hand if you think there's more than one species of orca or killer whales. Well, right now we call them ecotypes, and there are 2 recognized subspecies. We have not formally recognized separate species. However, there is a paper from just a couple years ago, geneticists claiming that we have enough evidence finally to split them into multiple species. We don't have them in multiple species. Right now, they're formally recognized as 2 subspecies out of that group, but we do have different types around the world. Northern Hemisphere and northern and southern hemisphere whales are quite different. And in each of those regions, they do specialize in their diet a lot. And you can notice that they do have different sizes. So the smaller ones typically are fish eating primarily, but maybe not exclusively depending on the region. Up here, it's exclusive fish. For what we call residents, a better name is just fish eating killer whales. But really what I'd like to talk today about is cultural transmission. I mentioned the calls already. We see culture in the diets, which is why we're getting speciation, different types. It's what they're learning from mom, what they're learning from grandmother. And those habits over time make it so the transients have a thicker jawbone, thicker skull, or a larger animal, more robust. The fish-eating ones are smaller and more slender, and I think that reason for that is for agility in chasing fish, but it could be other reasons as well. But around the world in the North Atlantic, the ones that eat primarily fish are smaller. in the Antarctic, the ones that eat primarily fish are smaller. And here, the ones that eat only fish are smaller, whereas the ones eating mammals are bigger, more robust, thicker bones that do more ramming of prey and things. And that comes back to what you learn from mom and what gets passed down generation through generation as culture. Have you heard the term residents, transients, offshores? Anybody? Most people have. And that applies only to the North Pacific. If you have fish eaters in the Antarctic, we don't call them residents. These names only apply to the North Pacific. And I don't like these names very much because they mislead us. Residents aren't always in the same spot. They are more predictable. But we have some residents, the AF and AG pods, that center their range. They spend a lot of time in southeast Alaska, but they've been seen in Kodiak. That doesn't sound very residential, 1,500 kilometers, right? We have some transients that only spend their time in Prince William Sound and occasionally Kenai Fjords, the AT1s I talked about. Not very transient, right? We do see patterns and habits from these so-called transients. Really, we should stick to it. They are genetically distinct. We should stick to fish-eating, mammal-eating, and shark-eating ecotypes for these. And we do have some ground toward speciation that's being proposed. And right now, formally recognized, the ones that eat fish, we still call them residents, but again, be careful with that name. Orcinus orca ater, which means black. If you think blackfish, killer whales and pilot whales and dwarfed pygmy killer whales and melon-headed whales are all considered blackfish. They're all in the dolphin family. And for the mammal hunting ones, which we also call Biggs killer whales, or we also call transients, is Orcinus orca rectipinus, which just means tall fin. And that is, those are two subspecies formally recognized, and we're working on the body literature to actually split them into species. Offshores, those are ones that take shark, and that shark liver came from probably a 12-foot long sleeper shark in Seward right off the waterfront across from 4th of July Beach, the Seward Marine Industrial Center. We picked that up out of the water as it was falling apart, about a 4-foot liver, crazy, and they were likely eating the liver of that one. That Dahl's porpoise finally became a nutritious meal for those killer whales out at Hinchinbrook entrance, and the fish probably found its life in Montague Strait. Back to the culture thing, we see it in the calls, we see it in the diets, and we see it in their hunting patterns and the places they go. Beach rubbing is an interesting way in which we see culture. Certain families like certain beach to rub their bellies on the beach. We think that they exfoliate, and it becomes kind of a social tradition as well. But you can hear them actually hitting the beach. Not yet, you'll hear it right there. Killer whale hitting the gravel on the beach and continuing to swim. If you learn from mom and grandma that that's your beach you like to go to and rub, it's not just one beach, but we don't see just random pods rubbing on random beaches. These families kind of have the ones that they enjoy and like, and we do think it is for skin maintenance. And that sounds for sure like, oh yeah, right there. We do think it's for skin maintenance, but it probably does become a tradition, like going to the spa or doing a sauna or something. We see it in their diet and where they have their hunting spots. One way we know that, we take pool nets to look for salmon scales. If we see a mom and a calf separated, we see mom turning and diving, chasing a fish, real rooster tail acceleration, and then a little later we see the calf come screaming, and we'll go in pretty quickly and look for salmon scales in the water, scooping up with a pool net. Then we know the age of the fish, the species of salmon, we know and potentially what river that salmon came from if they're mapped out well. So we can get a lot of data from that. And for years, we only used salmon scales for diet, and it led us to a little bit of a problem because you see all those purple dots down by Seward, Agnes Cove? That's all Chinook. So we thought they're eating kings mainly, and that's what they're doing in Washington State. However, where all the purple dots are is really easy to get scales. And where the orange is really hard to get scales, really rough weather. In Hinchinbrook, as many people in this room know, it's really hard to find samples up there. When we started to look more closely at the distribution of the data down in Seward, it's only 1 month and only about 18 animals taking Chinook just for that month. And when they're not hugging the shore in there, we find them catching chum just offshore. Up in Hinchinbrook Entrance, all that's chum. And those animals are there for 3 or 4 months. And with almost twice as many animals, AB pod, AI pod, AJ pod. And then the silver circles down in Night Island Passage, that's all salmon scales of coho that we've collected. When we start factoring how much time it actually was versus, not just being overbalanced for how many samples we collected in one spot, it looks fairly equivalent between chum, Chinook, and coho salmon are all very important in their diet, and then a little bit of halibut and arrowtooth flounder and black cod, sablefish mixed in there. And how do we know that? Poop. We love poop. Poop is a gold mine. With salmon scales, if you collect salmon scales, you only get, fish with scales. We didn't even know until 2016 we started collecting poop and understood much better that halibut is seen in their diet pretty equivalent through many different pods, through many different months, not only taking fish off long lines, but likely a major part of their important, consistent part, I should say. The percentages are lower, but a consistent portion of their diet is halibut. And for one pod that spends a lot of time here in the Sound, AE pod, Alpha Echo, AE pod, seems to love the arrowtooth flounder, and I don't understand it. Who's eating arrowtooth flounder? Do you understand it? Why would you eat arrowtooth flounder? It doesn't make any sense. It just falls apart. Ugh. One day in 2018, we got really lucky. We got a fecal sample from the mom and from the calf. We don't always know if they're in a big group. We don't know whose poop it was, and that's important to us. We want to know whose poop is who. And we happened to get a mom and a calf and a few others in the pod. And it was really interesting. Mom and calf both had majority chum and some halibut and some Chinook in those fecal samples. On the same day, in the same pod, the same family group, some of the others had majority chum overwhelmingly. So it was quite interesting to see more evidence towards mothers sharing with their calves, right, that the composition was so similar between the mom and calf. But yeah, mostly chum, Chinook, and coho fairly equivalently. That's very different from what you're here in Washington State with the southern residents, because a lot of their data is very different. We still don't know much about our wintertime data, and so it's quite likely that the diet is more diverse in the wintertime than it is in the summertime. But we're definitely not seeing overwhelmingly Chinook here. And even in British Columbia, it's not nearly the only Chinook story that it is down in the southern residents. I've been a part of a couple important papers that just came out last year. So one is for residents, the top one. See, here's those science papers where I have to write killer whales. I told you, I'm not lying. The top one is a diet of resident killer whales, and the bottom one is diet of offshore killer whales, the ones that primarily eat shark. And so our projects contribute, well, the top one is our projects paper, and the bottom one we contributed pretty heavily to. And those are very recent, hot off the last year, so those are great papers to look into it a little more. So when we see them foraging in specific spots, anybody have what's anyone's favorite restaurant to go to? Not because it's the only one here, but what's that? Anyone like Jack Sprat's as an example? Anyone like, I don't know, Spenard Roadhouse? What's your favorite restaurant? Beartooth. Paul? Beartooth? Sure. You get these habits, you find these spots, you learn from mom, you learn from grandma, and you're like, man, that place, and you find yourself just going there. Our pods will show up here. This is out of Seward at Agnes Cove every year about May 15th. They'll show up like clockwork looking for, and in that location, they are looking for Chinook salmon. And it's the same pods over and over again. Meanwhile, same time, over in Hinchinbrook, it's different pods, ones that have learned that that's our spot. In that spot, they're eating chum around that same time frame, and it's A, B, A, I, and A, J pods, which will also go out to Kayak Island, and occasionally show up in Seward area a little later on. But they have these habits. For the ones that take mammals, we have one named Matushka, AT109. She and her family are responsible. This is anyone know the Sea Life Center, the cameras on the sea lions at the Sea Life Center? This is Chiswell Island. And 90% of all sightings, photographs and evidence there are one family of transients. So this is why I don't like that word transient, right? That's a very strong habit. 90% of all of our data, all of our sightings at that location is one family, one mother and her offspring. So that doesn't lend well to this idea that transients are just roaming at random, right? Transients still, we have some quite resident transients, if you will, if I really want to screw it all up. But they're strong habits. Anyone been to the Needle in Montague Strait? A bunch of sea lions haul out on the Needle as well. And again, 90% of the sightings of this same family, Matushka and hers, and I think even amongst the mammal-eating killer whales, I think there's some degree of specialization where you have them focusing on a certain type of prey. I don't think every mammal-eating killer whale knows how to kill a larger whale like a humpback. I think it's some specialized groups that can do it. For most mammal-eating killer whales, the bulk of the prey is harbor seal, Dall's porpoise, and harbor porpoise. And then there's some that'll do sea lions or some that'll do whales, but across the board in the North Pacific for our transients, most all of the bulk of the diet is all harbor seal and porpoise. Who all has been over the Unaquack moraine or Columbia moraine? For those who don't know what a moraine is, imagine the glacier pushing like a bulldozer and then continuing to pile debris in a pile, and then when it retreats, there's a very shallow spot. So the whole fjord might be 900 feet deep, and the moraine only 30 feet deep. I don't know how deep, anyone know how deep Unaquack is? 20, 30 feet? I don't know. Or Columbia moraine? Anybody? It's quite shallow. You got to go slow and only go through at certain times because it's so shallow. As a result, killer whales don't go up in those fjords very much. But 90% of all sightings of mammal-eating killer whales up in there going for harbor seals are the AT1s, the Chugach transients, those 6 animals left out of the 22 that I talked about. And more in recent years, as they've been dwindling out, we've seen a few other groups starting to go in and take that niche. But that's true for Icy Bay, our local Icy Bay. That's true for Unaquack, true for Columbia. In Kenai Fjords, it's the same group. 90% of the sightings over Northwestern Fjord and Ialik Fjord moraines, 90% of the sightings are that same family as Unaquack and Columbia. So it's very strong patterns that, again, you learn from mom, you learn from grandmother. Has anyone, raise your hand if you've taken a boat through Chicken Pass in Seward? Very narrow little spot. It's less wide than this room, and you can take a 40, 50-foot boat through there. But boy, nobody better be coming the other way. On Channel 16, you hear southbound Chicken Pass, northbound Chicken Pass, and you can get through there. And a couple of times I've seen killer whales swim through Chicken Pass. And it's always the ones that spend a lot of time in Kenai Fjords. It's the one that know the waters really, really well. Everyone else swings out kind of wide. Same thing out in the Chiswells. The ones that know the area will go through Pete's Pass or one little notch. I've only seen one animal go through that short arrow spot, and it just made me happy as a clam to see it was one of the most commonly sighted pods in the area. It's the ones that know the waters best are using these little nooks. All the rest of the visitors that don't spend a lot of time around will do this kind of wide arc through the islands. And now I have to tell you a sad story, but it ends well, I promise. Several years ago, there was a researcher by the name of Brianna Wright who wrote a paper about kin-directed sharing, mainly of salmon, right? Mom sharing with offspring, siblings sharing, grandmothers sharing with offspring, grand offspring. And she found that if grandmother's still alive, the survival rate for that calf is higher. That makes sense to us, right? How many people do you know have moved back to the East Coast to be with the grandparents when they have kids, right? Or it makes it easier to have somebody else to help care. We do document that grandmothers are sharing salmon with the young ones, so you're not on your own if your mom's still alive. So that's been a documented thing. Unfortunately, that upper photograph, that was Lou's first, AK-17's first attempt at a calf. And when she first got pregnant, her mom had died the year before. And so she was swimming with her brother and kind of a ways away from her sister, didn't seem terribly close with her sister. She lost that calf, but right before she did, she bounced to swim with her cousins and her aunt, probably thinking she'd get more support from her aunt than her sister. A little unusual, but not totally out of the box. So she bounces to swim with her cousins and her aunt, but then her aunt died. She lost that calf. 3 years later, she had another attempt at a calf, and now her aunt's gone too. She's swimming with her cousins, wasn't getting the level of support that was very helpful. She lost her second calf. Now she's on her third calf and pretty much on her own, but it's surviving now. It's 5 years old now. We haven't seen the calf this year, but we saw it late last year. And we expect that it's gone through the hard part of the survival curve and it's going to make it. But it just really emphasized this whole point where you have these multi-generational families and the importance of why that works in these fish-eating societies. And this is true for the fish-eating ones. For the mammal-eating ones, it's a little more fluid. They will swim with mom. A good chunk of their lives is fairly static, but a little more fluid, but not these larger group families. And it helps them out. It helps toward their survival to that multi-generational learning. Oh yeah, well, shoot. You already heard a little echolocation. To find fish and bounce off fish and come back. The mammal-eating ones don't do this. It's just the fish-eating and the shark-eating types. Nice, quiet, killer whale calls. Boat's going to start up. That's the motor, but the prop cavitation will come. That's just going into gear. So the boat motor is not so, that's not the loud part. The loud part's prop cavitation, going fast when your boat's still going slow. Really accelerating fast is super loud. Twisting one engine forward, one engine back is incredibly loud, so please no twisting. One forward, one reverse. For those boat people, you know what I'm talking about. Everyone else, don't worry about it. You're not on the water. Biphonic calls are super cool. You hear a whistle and a rear, right? A whistle and a buzz. The whistle only goes forward. The buzz goes all the way around. So if mom's facing away, the calf knows that mom's facing away and knows all the angle. There's more to that, but it's pretty fascinating, the level of information they can get. That's just a family name call, but it's laced with other information. And for your Prince William Sound locals that sound completely like aliens, if you don't have a hydrophone for your boat, I highly recommend it. If you're a kayak guide, you can get a hydrophone for a couple $100. It's pretty rare to be able to do it. And lastly, I'll end with, and fasten your safety belts, is you're going to hear a mom call and the calf mimic the call in learning the family call. I mean, come on. So, if you've never seen a photograph of a dolphin brain, I highly recommend you look for it online and keep it on your phone so you can show all your guests. Size of brain isn't so important because that scales up with the size of animals, but complexity is important. More gray matter pound for pound than we have, there's a very good chance that these animals, including all the porpoises, all the toothed whales, and any of the whales actually have a more convoluted brain than we have. And it could be echolocation, but it could be social grouping, or it could just be that they have more spare intelligence than us. So we should probably treat them kindly. And that's it for me. If you have any questions or photos or videos you want to send, or audio clips when you see whales, send them to me at whalesalaska@gmail.com. And thank you.